temporary ceasefire in Gaza has brought scenes of unbridled joy in the middle of a relentless tragedy. 50 Israeli hostages are finally being released by Hamas. 150 Palestinian prisoners and trucks carrying much-needed aid are moving in the opposite direction. For some of the families of the Hamas hostages, it's the end of an unbearable, agonising wait. Thomas Hand's daughter Emily turned 9 during her 50 days in captivity. His emotional interviews have made the trauma of the hostage families feel tangible for those of us who can only begin to imagine the appalling, horrifying grief. This is the moment they were finally reunited. A wonderful end to a story that could have ended so much worse, and indeed that was the fate that poor father assumed had happened. Well, a 2-day extension to the ceasefire means more reunions and more aid, but it also means more difficult questions for Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu is very clear that war will resume with full force as soon as this pause is over. He's far less clear about what happens after that. Israel's pounded Gaza for weeks now. 77% of the entire population has been displaced. Half are in shelters where 700 people share a single shower. The scale of the destruction is beyond comprehension, and Israel says it won't stop until Hamas has been eradicated. But quite clearly, Hamas still runs Gaza. It's Hamas who are negotiating the release of the hostages and dictating the terms of that release. It's Hamas who says that more than 14,000 people in Gaza have been killed. Israel claims that figure includes thousands of terrorists, but where is the hard evidence to support that claim? Where is the evidence that terrorists have simply not disappeared underground or hidden themselves among innocent civilians who headed south? Where is the plan for the future of Gaza? Where do these people go back and live if all their homes have been destroyed? Netanyahu has ruled out a return for the Palestinian Authority, hinted that Israeli occupation might be the answer.
I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
This is dangerous territory for Israel. It has a rapidly narrowing window of legitimacy in Gaza. President Biden is under pressure from his supporters to speed up the end of the fighting. And America won't accept a prolonged occupation. Israel told Palestinians to move south in Gaza to escape the bombing. Now it says it'll bomb the south too. This bloodshed cannot continue without proof there's a plan beyond the total destruction of Gaza. I've been picked up this weekend by people reminding me of tweets from 2014. Back then, Israel launched a massive bombardment of Gaza in response to the murder of 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank. What happened? I'm asked. Why did I change my position? Well, I haven't changed my position. Israel committed atrocities in 2014, in my estimation. It was a completely disproportionate response to what had happened. It looked more like revenge to me than a military strategy, and President Obama told them to call it off. Well, during that bombardment, I asked, at what point does Israel's current military strategy become the very terrorism it professes to be fighting? And today, I'm beginning to ask myself that exact same question. Well, I'm now joined by Israeli spokesman Eylon Levy. Eylon Levy, thank you very much indeed for joining me. You heard my monologue there. I've said from the start of this conflict that I felt a real moral quandary, not about October the 7th. I'm crystal clear about the horror that happened there. I'm completely clear that Israel not only had a duty to its people to defend itself after that, but had a responsibility to do it. The question has always been in my mind, what is a proportionate response? And as we have this pause at the moment, thank God for the release of many of the hostages, it's also time for everybody to pause and ask some pertinent questions of Israel about what the real plan is here going forward. So let me start just by asking you, where does this go now? We've got a two-day extension to this pause. More hostages will come out, but it won't be all of them. In fact, Hamas don't even know where many of the hostages are. They're with other Islamic fundamentalist groups within Gaza. Netanyahu has already said, your Prime Minister, that he wants to pick up the attacks as soon as this pause is finished. But to what end and how far will you go?
Israel's campaign now in response to the October 7th massacre is proportionate to the threat that we face. And that threat is a second October 7th, a third October 7th, the fourth million October 7th, exactly as Hamas is promising to do, to murder every man, woman, child in our country. We really wish we were not in this situation, Piers. And for many years, Israel has been putting off a possible campaign to topple Hamas. But the October 7th massacre left us no choice. It was the deadliest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It was the deadliest terror attack in world history since 9/11. And in response to that, our campaign is going to continue to destroy Hamas. This war will end with the end of Hamas because we cannot allow it to remain in power. And we know that the scenes on our screens are very difficult, and we're doing everything we can to minimize civilian casualties. But everyone in Israel understands that the consequences of inaction would be too great to bear. Because we cannot leave Hamas in power and our hostages in Gaza. We cannot leave Hamas emboldened to continue attacking our people, to launch another murderous campaign like it did on October 7th with those barbaric acts that you have spoken so powerfully against, the burnings, the beheadings, the abductions. We simply cannot go back to 6 a.m. on October 7th. That will not happen. That massacre was the straw that broke the back of a very strong camel, and this war is going to end with the end of Hamas.
Okay. How many Palestinians, including Hamas terrorists, have you so far killed?
We know that we've killed thousands of terrorists. We know
well, hang on. Let me ask you about that. So the Hamas-run health authority says it's over 14,000 people have now been killed. Of that, I mean, do you accept those numbers? Because they have been endorsed by other bodies, but do you accept that those numbers are fairly accurate? Historically, they have been.
Hamas is the organization, the army of terror that on October 7th burned, beheaded, abducted people, and then lied about it to the entire international media.
I understand that.
So it is the opposite of a credible source. And
I understand that, but do you accept, given that previous figures that they have given during the many years of this conflict about casualties have turned out to be pretty accurate, do you accept this is likely to be the range of people who've been killed?
First of all, they haven't been proven accurate because historically Hamas never admits in the course of the war that its own terrorists are killed, and that only comes to light afterwards. I'll say what we know about the numbers, and we don't have exact numbers because, Piers, I can't tell you how many Israelis were murdered in the October 7th massacre because we still have dozens of body parts, dozens of body bags of unidentifiable human remains. So the idea that I can give you an exact number is not realistic, but here's what I can tell you. One, we know we've killed thousands of terrorists because our campaign has been target the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th
How do you know they're terrorists?
Two, we know... How do we know they're terrorists?
How do you tell a Hamas terrorist from a Palestinian civilian who's not part of Hamas?
Hamas is making it very difficult to do that because we know that it's
So how do you know you've killed thousands of them?
Because we know who we are targeting. We are targeting on the basis of precise intelligence. This isn't an indiscriminate bombardment as many would like to paint it. Hamas knows that we do not target civilians. It seems to know that better than some in the West. That's why, for example, we recently declassified an intercepted phone call of Islamic Jihad terrorists talking about transporting an anti-tank missile in a baby's pram because they know perfectly well that Israel is trying to target the terrorists and not the civilians.
Okay, but here's my problem with this, is that by your own admission, you don't know how many Hamas terrorists, and I categorize people who belong to the Hamas organization as terrorists, just for clarity. But you don't actually know, do you, how many of them you've killed? And by your own admission, just a few moments ago, you said that they make it incredibly difficult for you to work out who is a Hamas terrorist and who is a civilian. And that seems to me part of the problem that you have with the optics of this to the wider world, is that they're seeing horrible imagery all day long. I mean, it's just the worst thing I've ever seen all over social media.
The worst thing we've ever seen were the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th.
I've not seen, thankfully, I've not seen what many journalists have seen, which is the 45-minute film of that. And I understand it's absolutely horrific. And I'm not making any comparison. I would not say anything is worse than that. So for the record, but the horrible imagery all day long, it is suggesting to people that there are thousands and thousands of women and a lot of children maybe as many as 5,000, 6,000 children now, have been killed by these airstrikes and now the ground attack. And I think the problem that you have, and I say this respectfully, the problem you have is that you don't actually know how many Hamas terrorists you're killing. I mean, if you're honest, you don't, do you?
Piers, the sad fact is, everyone who has been killed in the Gaza Strip in the last month and a half would still be alive if Hamas had not launched this war with the October 7th massacre and then fought out of densely populated civilian areas that it has done its darndest to prevent people from evacuating in order to get to safety while we try to get them to safety. But I want to say something about the civilian casualties because I think this is important. We know that we've killed thousands of terrorists. We know that Hamas is inflating the numbers.
You don't actually know
and
that.
we believe...
But that's my problem with this. You say you have, but when I push you for the details, you don't have them. And that
Piers,
for me,
I still
that's
can't
the
tell
problem
you
that you
exactly how many Israelis were murdered in the October 7th
I understand
massacre,
that.
because we're still
and that's
counting
horrific.
bodies.
No, but I agree with you. That is utterly horrific that you still can't determine how many people were killed that day because of the horrors that were perpetrated. You and I are in complete agreement. But nor do you know how many of these Hamas terrorists you're killing. It could be that vast numbers of them, and we think there are around 35,000 perhaps in total, that vast numbers of them either disappeared into the tunnels and have been safely there ever since, or simply went south with the million or more Palestinian supposed civilians that went down there. Maybe a lot of them infiltrated that group and are down in the south. You don't actually know, do you, for sure?
Piers, during the Afghanistan war, and I believe your brother, a real military hero, fought in that war, British military spokespeople could not have given you a running commentary in real time about exactly how many Taliban fighters were killed. During the Second World War, and I know your grandfather was a war hero who fought the Japanese to liberate Burma, the British Army could not have given a running tally of how many civilians were killed there or how many Japanese were being killed. These are facts that become clear when the fog of war clears. And what I can tell you is that when the fog of war clears, and the numbers become clear about the civilian to combatant ratio inside the Gaza Strip, and you compare that to other counter-terrorism wars fought by Western armies, like the British in Afghanistan, like the British in Iraq, like the British against Islamic State, that ratio is going to prove very firmly the extent to which the Israeli army has gone to try to keep civilians on the other side safe from the consequences of their own leaders' reckless and evil and barbaric attempts to try to keep them in harm's way. Piers, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. Civilian casualties are a feature of every war, and they are a feature of this war that Hamas began and that Hamas is forcing us to fight inside densely populated areas.
The reason I'm pushing you on it is simply because you say you've killed thousands of Hamas terrorists. And the reason I think this is such an important question is there have been reports that once this pause is over, that Israel intends to then attack in the south and may give further warnings to people that are out of certain areas, but will attack in the south and presumably destroy the areas that you attack there, as you have done in the north, making it almost uninhabitable for people to return to. And all of this is part of Operation Get Rid of Hamas. But if the world doesn't know how much of Hamas you're getting rid of, but only sees day after day, hour after hour, images of children dead, women dead, innocent civilians caught up in this, then I think the global support for Israel is going to dissipate very quickly. That's why it's really important, I think, for Israel to be able to demonstrate to people that your mission is being accomplished. Because, otherwise you could be here in 6 months, a year, and the civilian death toll in Gaza could be over 100,000. And we might be having the same conversation where you're still not sure how many Hamas terrorists you've killed. That's the problem, it seems to me.
Piers, I'm slightly surprised by this question because in the fog of war, no country, no military in the history of warfare could ever give you an exact running tally.
I'm not after an exact number.
The casualties, but I'm saying we know that we are targeting Hamas. We know that we are targeting the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre, and we know that we are trying to foil their strategy to hide behind women and children. And just this week, we've exposed the world the evidence of the bunkers that they built underneath the Shifa hospital that so many have spent so long trying to cover up and deny that Hamas is capable of using that strategy of human shields.
Let me ask you, what happens, assuming this war ends, and please God it ends sooner rather than later, but assuming it ends, Benjamin Netanyahu has said he intends to effectively occupy, for Israel to occupy Gaza for security reasons indefinitely. Well, that's really what he said. Indefinitely.
That is
incorrect. You would be in charge of security. I mean, you're already in charge of a lot of their food, their energy, their water. If you start adding security as an umbrella, basically you're occupying Gaza. That is not anything that anybody wants outside of, it seems to me, him and his cabinet. I mean, it's not what you would want, is it?
No, Piers. Israel does not want to occupy the Gaza Strip, and that is why 18 years ago Israel left the Gaza Strip.
So why would he say he wants to do that indefinitely for security reasons?
Because the sad fact is, the Prime Minister has said, we do not want to occupy Gaza. To say that the Prime Minister said that is simply false. He said Israel will have to, for some period, to exercise security control to prevent that area from being demilitarized, just as President Biden said in his own column in the Washington Post that there will have to be interim security arrangements.
How do you do that?
We're going to have to prevent smuggling of any weapons inside the Gaza Strip after we have totally destroyed the Hamas terror infrastructure. You know, Piers, in the years that Israel has been out of the Gaza Strip, all that concrete that went into Gaza and was supposed to build people's houses went into tunnels. All those pipes that were supposed to go into water pipes, Hamas dug them out and then filmed propaganda videos of them turning those water pipes into rockets and shooting them at Israel. And that is what we have to prevent to stop this happening again.